Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining today's ISO Board of Governors General Session meeting. Please note that all audio connections will be muted to minimize background noise. To make a comment today verbally, click the raise hand icon located at the bottom of the screen to place yourself in the comment queue. When it's your turn to speak, simply click the unmute button in the pop-up message that will appear on your screen. Please remember to state your name and affiliation prior to your comments. If you are dialed in on our phone-only line, please press #2 to place yourself in the comment queue. With that, I will turn the meeting over to ISO Board of Governors Chair, Mary Leslie. Mary, please go ahead.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome to everybody. I think what's unique about this meeting today is we're 100% virtual out of an abundance of caution. Sacramento raised its standards for COVID protection, and we are going to abide by it. We do plan to meet in person, the board and the governing board in future meetings between now and the end of the year. However, we need to abide by those recommendations made by the county and prepare our meeting space appropriately. So today we are all virtual. Welcome. We have a series of key decisional items that are being presented for our consideration. We're looking forward to you participating with us and your comments. So with that, Roger.
Thank you, Chair Leslie. Let's go ahead with the roll call. And we'll start with you, Chair Leslie.
Present.
Vice Chair Shorey.
Here.
Governor Borenstein.
Here.
Governor Edo.
Here.
And Governor Galitova.
Present.
Excellent. Thank you, governors. We do have a quorum and full board here today, so we can proceed.
Thank you, Roger. And now we will move on to the first agenda item, the general public comment. The general public comment are for any items not on the agenda. Michelle, could you see if there's any questions?
Absolutely. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, if you would like to make a public comment, pressing the raise hand icon, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, will place you into the comment queue. If you are joined today via our phone-only audio line, pressing #2 will enter you into the queue. All right. I do not see any raised hands currently.
With no raised hands, we will move on to our first decisional item, item number 2, general session minutes. May the corporate secretary please call for the vote. Roger.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again. May I have a motion for the to approve the decision on the July 20th, 2023 general session minutes for the Board of Governors?
So moved. Oh, I'll be second.
So that was
Jan.
Jan was first and Angelina was second. And we'll go ahead with the vote. Chair Leslie, your vote?
Aye.
Governor Shorey?
Aye.
Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor?
Aye.
And Governor Galitova?
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion passes. Back to you, Chair Leslie.
Very good. We'll move on to our item number 3, the CEO report from Elliot Mainzer. Elliot.
Yes, thank you, Chair Leslie. Governors, good morning. Nice to see you and to all attendants. Happy fall to everybody here on September 21st. I know we're all probably just a little bit relieved again to turn the corner on another interesting and challenging summer. I did want to start, however, by once again congratulating Governor Galitova on her confirmation again for her 5th term to the California ISO Board of Governors. Congratulations, Angelina. We're super pleased to have you on board for another term. And thanks again for all your support. So my CEO report and various other documents have I think now done a decent job of starting to characterize the detailed narrative of the events of July, but I wanted just to provide a couple of high-level thoughts just to highlight some of the items on my CEO report. I will also mention from the outset that earlier this week we released a very comprehensive and thorough review of July operating conditions on the ISO grid. And we'll be having a public stakeholder meeting on the 27th to go over those findings. But I just think it's interesting to note just how this year's summer operations in many ways were sort of a mirror image of what we saw last year. I think we all recall last September in California, our grid really taken to the edge with an unprecedented sort of Labor Day heat wave, an all-time record heat event for California, 52,000 megawatts, 167,000 megawatts for the Western Electric Coordinating Council. And we were able at that time, obviously, to import a significant amount of energy from across the West, where the Northwest had just a very nice abundant water year. And of course, the desert Southwest had been hot, but not extreme. 10, 11 months later, the tables were really turned. Relatively modest temperatures and loads in California, significant additional resources on the California grid, and of course, the Northern Columbia snowpack had ended up in the Sierra Nevada. I think we had 244% of average snowpack in California, and really strong hydro conditions. So when we got into July, we were, although things were in pretty good shape here in California, much below average water year up in the Pacific Northwest, and all-time record heat and demand in the desert Southwest. I think they had 30 days of above 110 degree temperatures down in Phoenix. And so as we went into the latter part of July, the tables had really turned, and there was, although we were only in the 42,000 megawatt load zone in California, we had huge amounts of demand from outside of California. And even on July 20th, I think we were at about 96% of the WEC-wide demand that we saw last year. So the tables were turned. We were obviously carrying a lot of load and a lot of demand on the overall system. That said, we did go into the evening of July 20th feeling as though we had set up the system fine, but a series of sort of supply uncertainties inside the hour that are all very much detailed comprehensively in our report resulted in us having to tap into our operating reserves, hit an EEA1, and ended up having to use some RDRR, which we always are sensitive to using. But at the end of the day, we found in retrospect that our margins were a little light. And I think there were just some general lessons learned around the increasing variability and volatility of the system, the importance of access to resource adequacy capacity within California, the critical nature and the importance of low priority export curtailments, their role in maintaining load resource balance, and also the importance of working with the broader energy community to clarify roles and rules around interchange schedules and tagging, and just to continue working with our adjacent system operators to maintain we can support reliability for everyone without compromising reliability for anyone. So it was definitely some good lessons learned. I wanted to make sure that everybody has a chance to see that report, which is posted on our website. We really do believe that in events like this, there's always learning opportunities and always opportunities for improvement, and also just very important to be very transparent about what those lessons were and to make sure that folks have a chance to provide feedback. So I encourage folks to participate in the September 27th conversation and to continue to work with us as we evolve our grid under ever-changing system conditions. And then, of course, in October, likely we'll release the August market report. August was also a set of interesting conditions west-wide, as again, we had to really work together as a Western energy community to support reliability for the entire interconnection. I wanted to turn next to EDAM and the DAME tariff filing. I think, as you are all aware, back on August 22nd, we did file our proposed EDAM tariff changes with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, along with the EDAM tariff. Just could not be more pleased to have that tariff filed, and just thanks again to the enormous number of people that worked across the West to support us in developing that tariff, just hundreds of hours of workshops and hundreds of pages of filings and comments to process. And I just really appreciate the energy that went into to getting that filed. And of course, we did request an expedited ruling by the commission. We requested that they would accept those tariff amendments by December 21st, 2023. We do want to try to maintain our momentum. This is going to be a big lift for everyone involved, the technology, the people to process the associated tariff filings. And so we did ask the commission to see if they could get their review turned around by the end of December. We'll see how that goes. In the interim, I also wanted just to be transparent, as we heard back at the EDAM forum a couple of weeks ago, we had been talking for some time about a 2025 implementation schedule for EDAM. But I would say at this point, given what messaging we've heard from PacifiCorp and our latest utility to commit, balancing authority to commit, the balancing authority of Northern California, we're more likely to be heading towards a 2026 implementation. So our team is now looking at the implementation path, the timing, and the sequencing of the different initiatives. And we will continue to work with our EDAM partners to make sure that we're on a glide path for implementation that really works for everyone. But as I mentioned, we were extremely pleased back on August 30th at the EDAM forum in Las Vegas, which itself was just a great meeting. We really appreciated all the turnout. I think we had about 240 people in attendance in person at the EDAM forum. Another, I think, between 300 and 500 people at any time online participating. Just great energy, great engagement. We did hear from Jim Shetler of the Balancing Authority of Northern California that they are committing to EDAM. It was also nice to know that their largest utility, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, was enthusiastically getting ready to participate as well. Just a really nice addition of transmission connectivity and resource diversity to the market. And Bank's just been a fabulous partner to us all along. And just in general, I felt that the forum was just an opportunity for some really open and frank dialogue about just sort of the general state of affairs with respect to day-ahead market evolution. I just think it's so important to get those different voices into the mix and make sure that we're really listening to each other, really carrying water for each other, and making sure that we continue to evolving with each other to the maximum extent possible. So thanks to everyone who participated in that meeting and just made it, I think, a really just very encouraging and successful session. Turning next to our interconnection process enhancements, as we've spoken for some time here, obviously at the CAISO, transmission planning, transmission expansion, interconnection queuing, being able to onboard that 7,000 megawatts of clean energy resources onto our grid every year to help keep the state on board with respect to SB 100 is just a major priority for us. And later today, we will be releasing the straw proposal for the interconnection process enhancements phase 2 effort. I wanted to mention also, just in terms of process, this is just such a critical initiative that affects so many people from across California and the West, really nationally, that we've really opened this process up to our sort of new working group approach that we used for EDAM. We've had some really engaging and very thoughtful sessions with folks from across the industry spectrum. I've really appreciated the way that they've leaned in so far. And so the straw proposal will really attempt to synthesize that input and get a set of proposals on the street. I wanted just to read directly one of the paragraphs from the CEO report. You know, the IP straw proposal envisions a streamlined process with prioritization of commercially viable projects in zones with available transmission capacity. Our goal is to see the most advanced projects move forward into a streamlined single-phase study process with more explicit provisions around time in queue to prevent projects from lingering in the queue and frustrating future development. We're on track to bring these changes to the Board of Governors at the February 2024 meeting. Of course, simultaneous with this process, in late July, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission did issue Order 2023, which outlines new requirements for improvements to generation interconnection procedures and agreements. So we are simultaneously developing our IPE2 enhancements while getting ready to comply with FERC Order 2023 by December 4th, and incorporating those structural changes from Order 2023 into our IPE processes as well. So that's going to be quite a bit of work, but we think that the commission has advanced some reforms that we think will be very helpful, and we look forward to getting a good compliance filing in place by the end of the year, and then coming back to the board in February 2024 with a set of additional enhancements that will go even above and beyond Order 2023. I think we all know that this is a major issue, and better synchronizing transmission planning, power planning, and interconnection queuing and procurement is just absolutely essential for reliability and the onboarding of new resources. Just the last couple items. We're, as many of you are now aware, we are in the process, actually on September 1st, our short-term forecasting team published a technical bulletin regarding the annular solar eclipse that's going to be passing over the western United States, including California, Oregon, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico on the morning of Saturday, October 14th. So this is going to be an interesting event. As you know, we had an event like this back in August of 2017, but this year's eclipse is going to be more impactful because of the growth in solar capacity since 2017. I think these are interesting numbers, right? The ISO grid scale and rooftop behind the meter solar have grown by 6,500 megawatts and 8,550 megawatts respectively since 2017. And the WEIM footprint grid scale and rooftop solar have also grown by 9,400 and 5,700 megawatts respectively in the last 6 years. And so this is going to be a more impactful event. We're going to see some significant ramping activity. The grid scale renewable generation is expected to decline by 9,374 megawatts during a time when gross load is going to be increasing by 2,374. So managing those ramps, making sure that we've got the market dispatch and the reliability operation all lined up in advance is something we're taking quite seriously. And so we are going to continue to coordinate with RC West, with the utility distribution companies and the WEIM entities, just to make sure that our market operations support reliable system operations on the eclipse day. This is something I think is going to be a very interesting event for all of us. We're going to do quite a bit of documentation and see if there are any other lessons learned. And finally, just on a great note, as you guys know, our market expansion policy is really, really built on the transmission connectivity and resource diversity of the Western energy imbalance market, and just that set of relationships and partnerships that we've developed over the last decade. The second quarter benefits were released on July 31st. A new record of, the real-time energy markets second quarter benefits were 379.9 million, bringing the first half of 2023 to almost 800 million in benefits for the first half of the year. We've now crossed the 4.2 billion in cumulative benefits mark since 2014. And of course, the environmental benefits also significant, with a cumulative reduction in greenhouse gas emissions since WM started of more than 878,000 metric tons. So these are all important efforts. So certainly summer operations, reliability, transmission planning, and just keeping our market expansion efforts working as effectively as possible. Super excited to maintain our momentum moving into next year. And thanks to all of you for your support. So happy to take any questions or comments, and I'll turn it back to you, Chair Leslie. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Well, I have a comment, Elliot. In the 3 years you've been CEO giving these reports, I wish every report sounded like today, because I think you just covered a very broad spectrum of activity that shows that the ISO is on superb footing, and that we're making our commitment not only to the California goals, but to the Western goals. And you've done a great job. And the fact that we're not sitting here talking about extreme heat in the West and how we're going to protect ourselves and what our summer readiness looks like, it's truly wonderful to hear you not reporting on that, and instead reporting on all the things we're doing proactively. And you get a lot of credit for that, Elliot, because you've done a good job.
Oh,
and
thanks again.
and I would be remiss to not welcome and congratulate Angelina back onto the board. I don't think I ever thought she wasn't coming back onto the board, so it didn't seem like as big a deal. But I want to express our gratitude from all of us, Angelina, the rest of the board, that you have returned and you bring all your energy and knowledge and history back with you. So that's superb. And next, I think it's my responsibility to introduce our item number 4, and it's a pleasure to introduce Andy Campbell, the WEIM Governing Board Chair. And may it be duly noted, Andy, that in Elliot's report, that not only were we a year ago in desperate need of imports from our Western colleagues, but this year we reciprocated and became a net exporter to the Western grid. So I love that 2-year cycle, because it shows how important the EIM and the EDAM are to our interdependence. So with that, Chair Campbell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Leslie, so much for that introduction and welcome, and Vice Chair Shorey and governors. Thank you for inviting me to share updates on the governing body. My report's going to focus on the governing body general session, which was held just 2 days ago. So following a CEO report, we heard from Thad LeVar, chair of the Utah Public Service Commission and chair of the body of state regulators. He's providing a update on the body of state regulators. So they've very much been in education mode. This is regulators from each of the states that has an organization that's participating in the energy imbalance market. So they've been focusing on greenhouse gas policy, price formation, just kind of getting themselves up the learning curve and getting prepared for some of the, what are inherently complex decisions that will be coming along in those areas. This is the final meeting for Chair LeVar as chair of the body of state regulators. We had an opportunity to share our appreciation for Chair LeVar. It's just very notable how the bosser has really strengthened over his time as chair. They have monthly calls. I mean, they have very significant participation with the commissioners from across the West. People kind of see a lot of value in participating in that forum and in those meetings. And also, we've seen like every other market kind of gets stood up, or its construct, such as the resource adequacy, Western resource adequacy program. They all have like a bosser equivalent. Like that's kind of become the, everybody wants one of these, sees the value in having a group like the one that Chair LeVar has been leading. So Nevada Commissioner Haley Williamson will be assuming the role as chair of the bosser, and fortunately, Chair LeVar will remain as the member representing the Utah Commission. We also heard an update from Meg McNall, who represents the 6 cities. She serves as vice chair of the Regional Issues Forum, provided an update on what they've been focused on. Again, education mode, focusing on price formation, also thinking about how they're going to provide input into the roadmap process going forward. And then kind of picking up on that, those sort of flow of benefits and how the region's helping each other. We heard from Guillermo Bautista Alderete. He provided an update, the quarterly benefits report. And I think something I love in those presentations from Guillermo is there's these really cool graphics that kind of try to really depict how many flows are going back and forth between all kinds of balancing authority areas around the region. I mean, it's hard to, there's no way that the region could duplicate that without a market like the energy imbalance market. So he really communicates that well with his presentation. Anna McKenna updated us on the policy calendar. As you know, it's like there's a lot going on. Got to hear about the working group process and how that's really been kind of, becoming a normal approach for some of the more complex initiatives. And then, finally, I just wanted to recognize that at today's meeting, you'll be considering a proposal addressing the ISO's participation in the extended day-ahead market. Other balancing authorities will be looking at similar issues as they commit to join the market and learning from the ISO's approach. So we certainly appreciate the ISO's staffs and your board's focus on those topics. So this concludes my report.
Thank you, Chair Campbell. And now it is my pleasure to introduce item 5, the decision on EDAM ISO BAA participation rules. And we're back to you, Roger.
Yes, well, there were no public comment letters. And so for that, I think we just turn it to Anna McKenna for her introduction.
Thank you, Roger. Good morning, Chair Leslie, Vice Chair Shorey, Board of Governors, colleagues, and members of the public. I am happy to introduce item number 5 this morning, which is a decision on the extended day-ahead market ISO balancing authority area participation rules. Track 1, Danny Johnson, our market design sector manager, will be providing you a presentation on the proposal. And with that, I would like to ask Danny to provide us the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you, Danny.
All right. Before I get started, I wanted to publicly recognize C.B. Hall and James Lynn, without whom the ISO wouldn't be able to bring forward this proposal for your approval today. But now for the proposal itself, we need to move to the next slide. So as you recall, the EDM design that was approved earlier this year, it described the overarching market rules, functions, and requirements for a balancing authority area to participate within the EDM. Implicit in this design is that each BAA will set its own rules governing how it participates under this general EDM framework. This initiative specifically considers rules governing how the ISO balancing area will participate in the EDM. Management is proposing rules on 4 distinct participation questions. The first is the settlement of transfers that result from the EDM optimization, as well as transfer revenue that accrues from congestion between participating balancing authority areas. Both of these are new settlements that arise due to EDM participation. The settling of transfers ensures the ISO is able to settle the results of its EDM participation, while the second item, transfer revenue, represents a new revenue stream native to EDM. Next are rules that govern the allocation of historic transmission revenue recovered amounts. These are comprised of expected foregone revenues due to EDM participation. Third is the settlement for revenues and surcharges that arise from the EDM resource sufficiency evaluation. And finally, we're asking for your approval of the ISO balancing authority area's utilization of the EDM net export constraint to manage resource adequacy capacity in excess of the ISO BAA's EDM RSE obligation. While the general form of this constraint was approved through the EDM design, we're asking for specific approval on the ISO's proposed usage of this constraint. Next slide. Okay. The first element of this presentation is management's proposal related to transfers that result from the EDM optimization. This includes transfers for energy, imbalance reserves, and reliability capacity. The proposed settlement is a single-tiered allocation for transfers associated with existing transmission contracts and transmission ownership rights. The ISO proposes to settle directly with scheduling coordinators based on their usage of those rights. Then for transfers associated with the ISO balancing authority area, the net transfer settlement amount will be allocated to scheduling coordinators' meter demand prorated relative to the ISO BAA's meter demand. This will exclude the existing transmission contract and transmission ownership right meter demand that I previously mentioned. This settlement ensures that optimal transfers derived from market participation are settled with the scheduling coordinators directly participating in the market. Okay, yeah, next slide. So this next slide details the second settlement I mentioned, and it's management's proposed settlement of transfer revenue. Transfer revenues arise due to congestion and energy price differentials for serving demand within each EDM BAA. Management's proposal for settling this occurrence between the ISO and a neighboring EDM BAA. First, again, the ISO proposes to settle with scheduling coordinators that schedule their existing transmission contract or transmission ownership rights in advance of running the market. Again, this ensures that those rights are honored. Next, the ISO will settle with scheduling coordinators for existing transmission contracts and transmission ownership rights that were released or made available to the EDM prior to running the market, thus creating incentive for those rights holders to make their rights available to the market. The remaining transfer revenue will then be settled with all other scheduling coordinators based on their measured demand, excluding the existing transmission contract and transmission ownership right meter demand that again, I previously mentioned. Taken together, this proposed settlement ensures that the contracts or rights that are effectively not part of the optimal solution are respected, but then that the revenue derived from market participation goes directly to the scheduling coordinators who have participated in the market. So this next slide is management's proposal for distributing the historical transmission revenue recovered amount. The historic transmission revenue recoverable amount, that term is being used to broadly capture revenues previously realized or expected from the potential future sale of transmission that will be forgone with EDM participation. The ISO's proposal is to conduct this settlement with each participating transmission owner in proration based on their relationship to the ISO's total recoverable amount. The total recoverable amount, in turn, will be comprised of 3 distinct elements. This is consistent with EDM policy. The first is the historic wheeling access revenue. Next would be the new transmission project recoverable wheeling access revenue. And finally, the third is the excess wheel-through revenue. The final bullet on this slide, I wanted to note that the ISO BAA share of the EDM recoverable revenue will be collected from scheduling coordinators' gross load relative to the ISO's total gross load. This is again consistent with EDM policy. My intent here is to note this to provide the full information on how the historic transmission revenue will be treated by the ISO. The ISO's proposal to allocate to scheduling coordinators based on the revenue shortfalls due to EDM participation is reasonable, as the revenue will flow directly back to the parties whose previous or expected business was impacted due to EDM participation. Similarly, recovering the ISO share of the funding of recoverable revenue from gross load is reasonable, as ultimately it is gross load within the CAISO BA that is benefiting from EDM participation. Here we have management's proposal for a pro rata allocation to meter demand for revenues or surcharges associated with the EDM resource efficiency evaluation. You may recall that the EDM resource efficiency evaluation is a test run before the EDM that measures each BAA's ability to meet their own obligations with supply brought by that BAA to the market. This test is run across the entire day-ahead market horizon on an hourly basis. So consistent with that granularity, the ISO is proposing this pro rata allocation also be conducted on an hourly basis. Potential revenues will accrue when the ISO BAA passes the EDM RSE and another participating EDM BAA fails, while potential surcharges may accrue should the ISO BAA fail the EDM RSE. The proposed allocation is appropriate as the total BAA demand is ultimately what is tested for in the EDM RSE. However, the stakeholder process highlighted a desire for a more granular cost allocation, which I think the ISO ultimately agrees with. However, that process also determined that no more granular cost allocation was deemed feasible for EDM launch. There remain a multitude of avenues to design a more granular cost allocation. However, they raise really complex policy questions on the interplay of resource sufficiency and the CAISO and its component LRA's RA programs. Ultimately, the EDM RSE is a test at a BAA level, while a similarly uniform RA program among the CAISO BAA's LRAs does not exist. The CAISO looks forward to working through these policy questions with stakeholders to develop a more granular cost allocation through multiple different avenues. This includes both initiatives and working groups that are going to be starting next month. The final element of this proposed set of changes is management's proposal to utilize the EDM net export constraint. As a result of the current design of the EDM, or of the resource adequacy program and its day-ahead must-offer obligations, there's the potential for the supply brought by the ISO BAA to exceed the ISO BAA's requirements for meeting the EDM resource sufficiency evaluation. The intent of this proposal is to ensure that resource adequacy capacity above what was needed to pass the EDM RSE and fully and equitably participate in the EDM, if necessary, remains available to meet ISO BAA real-time reliability needs. This constraint, again, was proposed and approved as part of the EDM policy. While we're asking for your approval of the use of this constraint, I also intend to provide relevant details on how we propose to utilize this constraint. At a high level, I'd summarize our proposed usage as ensuring the ISO BA reliability while maximizing EDAM market participation and benefit. To do this, the ISO proposes to utilize both tunable parameters that are defined in this constraint. The first tunable parameter is the confidence factor. This will control the amount of supply that was ineligible to be counted for the ISO's resource efficiency evaluation that can back an EDAM export transfer. Translating this to plain English, this will control for the quantity of economy energy intertie supply offers made at the ISO's border that can be used to support a firm EDAM export transfer from the ISO BAA. The second tunable parameter is the reliability margin. Effectively, the ISO's use of the reliability margin will allow it to manage resource adequacy capacity to address risks that may arise between the day ahead and real-time market horizons. Again, I'll use an example to help translate the ISO's proposed usage of this constraint into plain English. Consider the ISO is aware of a fire near a common corridor that consists of multiple separate transmission circuits that are not normally protected for as a credible contingency. The ISO may not deem this risk sufficient to activate the contingency in its day-ahead market dispatch. However, the use of this constraint would ensure the ISO would have access to sufficient resource adequacy capacity beyond what was needed to meet its market participant obligation to redispatch around this constraint and continue to reliably serve load in the real time should conditions dictate. The ISO plans to further specify in detail the usage of these parameters within its business practice manuals. Slide. Okay. In general, stakeholders have been largely supportive of the rule set proposed by management. Regarding the changes pertaining to settlements, which were the first three elements, stakeholders were largely supportive. The exceptions would be a concern raised about the subscriber participating transmission owners being eligible for the recovery of historic transmission revenue. This is a concern that was also raised in the EDAM forum. However, the ISO believes it has arrived at the appropriate place. The other concern that was raised regarding the settlements was a desire for a more granular cost allocation for RSE failure, which I previously addressed. Regarding the EDAM net export constraint, I think the ISO received a much more diverse set of opinions. The majority of stakeholders representing load-serving entities within the CAISO preferred a conservative approach, while the CAISO BAA gains experience in the EDAM. Conversely, we also received comments that advocated for a much more hands-off usage of this constraint to maximize commercial benefit. Ultimately, we believe we're proposing a balanced approach that ensures the ISO BAA reliability through continued access to its resource adequacy capacity in excess of what was needed to pass the EDAM RSE with go live, but our proposed approach also provides the ability through the BPM process to adapt our use of the constraint as we gain experience within the EDAM.
Danny,
in summary, management.
You said that PTOs, I think, preferred a more conservative approach. And I just didn't understand. That word gets used in ways that I often can't follow. What makes it conservative? Could you?
Yeah, we might have gotten mixed that the conservative would, this constraint effectively manages CAISO's excess RA capacity. And so the conservative approach would be ensuring that that capacity does not go to back a firm EDAM export transfer and the capacity and remains available for real-time market use if system operators deem necessary.
Okay. And others, that is as opposed to a hands-off approach, meaning this is used, the intervention is used less.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Sure. No, I'm happy to clarify. Okay. Yeah, so in summary, management recommends the approval of the extended day-ahead market ISO balancing authority area participation rules that I've ran through today. The proposed rule set maximizes EDAM participation with EDAM go live for the ISO BAA, while also ensuring that reliability is maintained. Further ensures that the ISO will be able to settle all new settlements associated with its EDAM participation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Danny, this is Jan. Can I just ask one quick question in light of what Severin just asked? Because was my takeaway from that. That you got competing considerations and comments on the net export constraint. You had the advocates for those primarily responsible for serving load within the BAA, encouraging what Severin was having you clarify as a more conservative approach, which I take and translate as meaning you're holding back from the broader commercial market the resources that you think are necessary to assure reliability within the balancing authority. And you have these two tunable metrics now that are going to allow you, if something changes between the day ahead and the real-time markets, to be able to bring that back to meet reliability needs versus the other advocates who I assume are primarily out of the BAA, who were advocating for more release of these resources, which are designated RA resources, as I understood what you said. They were arguing to release more into the market, but you are taking, by this more conservative approach, am I correct in concluding from that you are assuring that the reliability of the BAA is being put first and foremost? I guess maybe that's too strong a statement, but that's what I took away.
I would definitely agree that the proposed usage ensures continued reliable operation of the CAISO BAA. I think the one clarification I'd like to make is that this just prevents the resource adequacy capacity, ideally from backing a firm EDM export transfer. It will surplus resource adequacy capacity will still be able to continue to participate in the market like it does today. It just, under this constraint, some subset of it will not be eligible to back a firm EDM export.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Danny? If there are no other questions from our board, then I believe Eric Hildebrand, our DMM, has comments. Eric?
Let's see. Hey, it's Ryan Kurlinski. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So good morning, Chair Leslie and Board of Governors. I'm Ryan Kurlinski from Monitor. DMM supports the ISO's proposal. It addresses important EDM policy elements for the CAISO balancing area that each potential EDM balancing area is going to need to address before they begin participating. And I should note that we intend for our comments to reflect our recommendations for all EDM balancing areas, not just the CAISO BA. First, DMM strongly supports the ultimate discretion that this policy gives to balancing area operators to set the net export hour. EDM is not designed with a common resource adequacy program, right? There isn't a forward capacity requirement and real-time must-offer obligation that all areas have agreed would meet their reliability needs. That would have been tough to pull off. But that kind of construct could allow all balancing areas to share responsibility for a load shed event if the whole footprint ended up being short on capacity in real time. So instead, EDM assigns responsibility for a real-time shortfall onto the balancing area that doesn't have enough supply to meet all its obligations. Obligations that include any EDM transfers scheduled in the area. So if one balancing area is showing up to EDM short on capacity, and that short causes the whole footprint to be short, other balancing areas will need to use a net export constraint to stop EDM transfers from shifting responsibility for potential real-time curtailments onto themselves. It'll be important for each balancing area's tariff to give its operators the discretion they need to use a net export constraint to maintain reliability. And this proposal gives the CAISO balancing areas operators that discretion, given control over the reserve margin portion of the constraint limit calculation. So during the large majority of hours, when the EDM footprint has excess capacity, it will be best for operators to leave the net export constraint limit as high as possible. Right, so that then the whole footprint can benefit from unrestrained trade between the balancing areas. The CAISO BA's initial policy here, it sets some caps on the net export constraint during all peak net load hours. And those caps may end up being a little conservative for low load days, conservative the way Danny defined it. So we appreciate that the policy has some parameters like the confidence factor that the CAISO BA can use to adjust those caps up. while still giving operators the discretion to use that reserve margin to set the net export constraint limit as low as they think they need to during any hour. Okay, this proposal also includes an interim approach for allocating the CAISO balancing area's EDAM resource efficiency evaluation failure costs. The allocation is a pro rata to meter demand on an hourly basis. The design of this cost allocation, it could impact incentives for how much excess capacity load serving entities forward contract for. And it could also impact incentives for the generators under those forward capacity contracts to be available and to perform. We think it'll be valuable for the CAISO BA in Track B to design a multi-tiered approach for allocating this cost to underperforming generators, as well as to load serving entities that they contracted with low amounts of capacity, low relative to their load obligations. But we understand the ISO cannot design and implement this more complex, more granular cost allocation scheme for the initial EDAM implementation. So we support the proposal as an interim approach. And the other aspects of the ISO's proposal before you also seem reasonable, so we support the overall proposal. So thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions from the board of Ryan? Seeing none, then Michelle, can we open it up to public comment and see if there are questions in the audience? Michelle?
All right, once again, ladies and gentlemen, pressing the raise hand icon on your Zoom screen will place you into the queue, or pressing #2 will enter you into the queue as well. Please remember to indicate your name and your affiliation. All right. And then once again, once I unmute you, please do press there'll be a little pop-up that comes on your screen. Please click on that and you will be unmuted. All right, we're going to go to our first caller I see in queue. Jeffrey Nelson, you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead. Mr. Nelson, your phone is unmuted. Go ahead and make your comment, sir. All right, I am not sure why Mr. Nelson is unable to mute at this time. So I'm going to move to the next caller in queue. All right, so the next caller in queue is Callie Wells. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Callie Wells. I'm just double checking you can hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Great. Good morning, Chairman, members of the board, and ISO leadership. I'm Callie Wells, and I'm here representing the Western Power Trading Forum. WPTF is a nonprofit trade forum dedicated to enhancing competition and transparency across the West. We have always been supportive of moving toward an RTO, with the first stop being EDAM. As these efforts continue to progress, more implementation details are being formalized as to how the CAISO will participate in the EDAM. And one of those details is before you today: the use of the net EDAM export transfer constraint in the CAISO balancing area. Fundamentally, this constraint restricts all California ISO area supply, both RA and non-RA, from supporting EDAM transfers. As you've already heard, the establishment of this constraint is part of the EDAM tariff filing that is currently before FERC, and that filing leaves it up to each balancing area to decide the details of how the constraint will be applied. So what the CAISO has presented to you today is their proposal for when and how to set the constraint for the CAISO balancing area. WPTF has been actively engaged in this initiative, and we want to emphasize that the CAISO staff has addressed the majority of our concerns. As the CAISO is well aware, and we wanted to make the board aware if they had not yet been informed by CAISO staff, that WPTF still has a couple outstanding concerns that may lead us to file a FERC protest. The most concerning issue to us is that the constraint will be more restrictive during what the CAISO is calling stressed hours. Stressed hours has been defined as, at a minimum, 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. every day. That means that even in the mildest of summer days or sunniest of spring days, the CAISO is going to hold back capacity above and beyond the amount needed to meet its own obligations. To us, this is an unnecessary restriction on free trade within EDAM. While we appreciate the CAISO staff making adjustments to the details of how the configurable components will be set to address some of our concerns, it still does not go far enough to accurately narrow in on the hours warranted by actual system conditions. We feel that this makes the constraint more restrictive than the original intent of the EDAM policy and sets a bad precedent as other balancing areas start to develop their own net export constraints. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
I have a couple questions, one for Callie, and well, actually, maybe it's not for Callie, but for Danny and Ryan. First of all, this is a BA policy, and all the other BAs in EDAM also will have policies of this sort. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes.
And so are those policies public from the other BAs? Do they have to be? How does this work?
I'm not aware if they're public. I would imagine they would be defined in the BPM equivalent of a neighboring EDM BA, similar to how the ISO is defining it.
But we don't have a actual compilation of what policies other EDAM participants are thinking of. I guess we don't have
Not
EDAM
yet.
participants yet. Right. Okay.
Severin, the other thing I'd like to clarify is that with the EDAM design, I think a lot of participating BAs may implicitly have the ability to do this, to manage the supply that they bring to the market through what they make available to the market. The ISO, I think, is a little bit uniquely situated with its RA program and its must-offer obligations.
Yeah, my impression is that CAISO is more obligated to be transparent about this than a lot of the other BAs. But I did want to address Kelly's point, which seems valid, that it might be valid, having across the board rule on 4 to 9 p.m., even on the mildest of days, if you're actually going to hold back, seems hard, unclear how that's warranted. But I was wondering if that's just gives the CAISO the authority to hold back.
So I would frame it as this is the starting point. In the policy process, we were pretty clear that as we go through the BPM process, we would be studying this and trying to relax at 4 and 9 p.m. seasonally or during different expected conditions when we don't have this concern. The other thing that made us comfortable with going forward with the 4 to 9 p.m. as a starting point is during those other conditions when this constraint may not be needed, it's also really unlikely to bind and ever affect market outcomes.
Yeah, I can see that. Although we did just have a not that extreme or not that clean, but case where California was pretty far below stress conditions and the rest of the West was in serious trouble. Okay, what can I just ask, was there a discussion of basing it on load rather than time of day?
So we actually started with a whole, there's a whole fleet of criteria, and it's an and statement that if any one of them's met, then we're in a stress condition. And we actually had a bunch that were based off operating conditions or kind of the grid alerts that the ISO puts out. And what we found as we went through the summer that may not have captured some of the conditions and the EEAs that we faced this summer. So as a starting point, we decided to be more conservative and just use that 4 and 9 p.m. to ensure that we weren't missing potential stress conditions and then work off that starting point.
Okay. I will file my repeated objection to the use of the word conservative when it's unclear what we're conserving. But I get it, I think. Thank you.
Sure.
Are there other questions or comments regarding Callie?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, for Callie, I'm sorry.
For Kelly, if there are none, then Michelle, can we move on to the next speaker? All right, seeing
Yes,
none.
we can move on to the next person in queue if we're finished with questions for Callie. All right, I assume we're done, so we're moving on to the next speaker in queue. Lauren Carr, your line is unmuted. Go ahead and speak.
Good morning, governors, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Lauren Carr. I'm with the California Community Choice Association. We represent 24 community choice aggregators serving load in California. I'm here to express CalCCA's support for the EDAM ISO BAA participation rules track A1 proposal, specifically the pro rata allocation to meter demand for RSE surcharges and revenues. CalCCA supports using cost causation to allocate costs whenever possible, but the causes of RSE failures can be many and can be particularly difficult to track. It will take time to define cost causation accurately, so we support the CAISO using pro rata allocations for this track of the initiative and then continuing the discussion in a future phase. We also support the CAISO's approach to the net export transfer constraint to protect the CAISO BA from reliability risks between day ahead and real time. CalCCA supports starting with the conservative approach as defined by Danny to setting the constraint that can be updated as we gain experience with EDAM. CalCCA requests the board approve the proposal, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, do we have any questions for Lauren? All right, it would appear we have no questions for Lauren. Thank you, Lauren. We're moving on to the next caller in queue. All right, we are going to hear from Jeffrey Nelson. Jeffrey, please go ahead.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Yes, sir. You may go ahead.
Excellent. My apologies for the technical difficulties with Zoom browser versions. Good morning, governors and ISO team. It's Jeffrey Nelson from Southern California Edison. Thanks for the opportunity of commenting. We, in general, are very strongly supportive of this proposal and all aspects. We have one limited exception that I want to talk about on the SPTO treatment. But before that, I want to emphasize some of the importance of the net export constraint. I guess really the threshold question is, can the ISO use it or not? I think that's really what's the core threshold question. And this is just an absolutely crucial feature for EDAM, this export constraint, particularly for the ISO's balancing authority. We're very differently situated than the rest of EDAM in that we'll be the only ones allowing intertie bids that will then be potentially converted into EDAM transfers. And we're really the only one that has sort of a must offer that is going to require our balancing authority to put all of our RA resources, all of our capacity into the market all of the time. No one else is going to have that sort of, at least initially in how RAP is working, they're going to have that, that obligation. As such, it's crucial the ISO have a tool to make sure that that capacity that's already been paid for by California, that is designed to make sure California has a reliable system, that's being counted on in our planning as being available, is in fact available when needed. So we're very strongly supportive of this. We also support sort of the ISO's philosophy of looking at how they're going to use this both in stressed and non-stressed conditions. As others have said, we are very supportive in sort of non-stress conditions of having the market be as open and, just to poke Severin, liberal as possible in its utilization of resources. But when reliability is becoming more of a prominent issue, taking a more guarded and thoughtful approach on what can be released when and what should be available to the ISO until there's certainty that it's excess. So very strongly supportive of this. It's a crucial tool. In our view, EDAM can't be guaranteed to operate reliably without this tool. So it's just a crucial tool and we fully support it. With that, we want to move on to our one objection, and it has to do with the treatment of the as of yet unfiled and yet approved subscriber participating transmission owner SPTO proposal that was recently approved by the board, and SC supports the SPTO model, but we have some second layer concerns on sort of cost recovery and the interaction of the SPTO with other transmission costs and the TAC, and thus raising the issue we have here. The ISO has proposed what we think are very important make whole type of payments to encourage transmission participation in EDAM, to encourage PTOs to turn their transmission over to the market so the market can optimize that. We think those are hugely important features of EDAM, something we support strongly, and we support the ISO's approach to this. However, in implementing that, the current tariff language, and I think it's section 25.2, I'm checking my reference here, 26.2, excuse me, lumps into transmission owners these subscriber PTOs. And it makes the subscriber PTOs also available for make-whole payments, including for being new transmission, including for lost wheeling revenues. And I guess there's a third flavor that won't be applicable, sort of this net wheel through. We view as completely inappropriate. SPTOs are transmission that have already been funded by subscribers. They already have their revenues recovered. They are not going to lose out on revenue by joining EDAM. They don't have historical revenue that needs to be made whole. And we view it's completely inappropriate to include this type of transmission in the make whole payments that are very appropriate for traditional transmission in EDAM. And our request actually is to have the board instruct the ISO to strike the SPTO allocations that are in 26.2, at least for a time. That stuff has not been approved yet, hasn't even been filed at FERC yet, and Edison does have concerns and is very likely to raise some of the similar cost collection concerns, and it's unclear how FERC will ultimately dispose of some of these second order details of the SPTO model. So procedurally, it's inappropriate to prejudge that issue and include it in the tariff at this time. And policy, it's inappropriate for a transmission owner that's already being fully paid for by subscribers to get a second source of revenue from EDAM that's intended to bring participation and make transmission owners whole. So it's nuanced, but it's an important point. And with that, again, we'd like to thank the ISO. Overall, an excellent proposal. We strongly back it. We have this one nuanced exception as rules are developing for the subscriber PTOs. We don't think it should be included at this stage. And I'll stop if there's any questions.
I have questions. Jeff, an SPTO has subscribers, but is it necessarily fully paid for? Is that, couldn't a transmission project go ahead that's partially paid for with subscribers, but with anticipation of wheeling revenues and other sorts of transfer revenues?
That's certainly not how the proposal initiated.
Wait, which proposal? The current proposal or just the idea of SPTOs?
The idea of SPTO. Now, the ISO has made rules that we object to that may have transformed it into something it was not originally designed to be. And by adding additional type of revenue sources as proposed here, it may be further transforming it into something it was never supposed to be. And thus in lies our portions of our objections, the philosophy behind our objections.
Because it seems like a perfectly valid business model could be transmission, merchant transmission that is partially subscriber funded and partially operations transaction funded? Is there, I mean, should we be discouraging that, do you think?
I think we should be discouraging frameworks that allow for or incentivize creative accounting to try to dismiss the revenues that are already funded through their subscribers and instead attempt to collect those revenues from ISO participants and other participants in the region, resulting in likely double collection.
Okay, yeah. I can see the concern about double collection, but it seems like, well, maybe I should let Danny respond. And Ryan, if you have thoughts. Ryan is no longer on, it looks like, but.
Yeah,
Danny,
thanks, Severin. So we're not intending for double collection. My understanding is the transmission rate that'll be filed for the SPTOs will consider the subscribers that they have on them, and that'll factor into the rate. So the potential recovery would just be for the remainder as you identified. That's not covered by subscribers.
Ryan, you came on and went off. Was that because did you have a view?
Yeah, that's a show of paying attention. No, we're not, I'm not prepared to remark on this issue.
Jeff, are you worried that even though the CAISO says that the goal is for the remainder collection on the remainder, the non-subscriber portion, it won't be possible, or that it's not written that way, or what's your concern?
Well, let's start about sort of lost opportunity, right, for not joining an RTO or not joining EDAM. So the philosophy behind the EDAM proposal was there might be someone that was building new transmission, but if they join EDAM, they'll be turning it over to EDAM and not be able to realize sales, right? Sort of above beyond the needs sales. So the argument was, hey, well, you don't want to disincentivize me for not putting my transmission into EDAM. So we should come up with some sort of proxy of like, but for joining EDAM, what would have been my revenues, and kind of make me whole to that. Okay, I don't disagree. In sort of the traditional sort of standard transmission that's out there by folks. But now let's go to an SPTO model. SPTO was never even sort of the framework of I had an alternative to be outside of your market and collect through some other mechanism. That wasn't even an option. An SPTO was designed to be paid for by subscribers and put into the ISO's balancing authority. It's kind of like by definition, not even an option. And yet this tariff language will allow an SPTO to, in my reading of it, to argue for that but for collection. But for joining EDAM, I would have gotten this revenue, so now you owe me money. And that goes just counter to the whole philosophy of what an SPTO is.
I'd like now, Jeff, if we could have, I see Mark's hand.
Yeah,
if Mark could help clarify and if Danny has final thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, and thanks for Jeff's comments. I think this is a level of detail that is getting into the actual language of the tariff. I think Danny correctly stated the intent. I would like to maybe allow the process to take place that allows us to reconcile this nuance as it applies to the SPTO through the continuing drafting of the tariff language. I don't think it deviates from our intent or the higher level policy that we're asking for approval for today.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That's helpful.
And Danny, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I have nothing to add to what Mark just said. Thank you, though.
Terrific. And Jeff, does that may not satisfy you, but is that,
Yeah.
is that what I think what Mark's trying to tell you is that there's another round, but it's not right now.
That's very good. And I just want to be on the record for clarity that we support the SPTO model. It's these sort of second level nuances of making sure it works as intended in both the market in general and now in the specifics of the EDAM make-whole payments. So it's not an opposition in general. It's a opposition in a specific application, and we'll be happy to work with the ISO in sort of refining tariff language and see if we can get there.
Perfect. Thank you. Michelle, could you tell us how many more speakers we have in the queue?
We have one more person currently in queue. If you would like to unmute them.
Please.
All right. Scott, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hello, this is Scott Renzel with Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a 20-minute speech prepared. I'm going to pass, and I'm going to reflect that PG&E
is that ISO humor, Scott?
That's ISO humor.
That's
good. It didn't fail.
Okay, no, we heard it. We got it. Very funny.
PG&E wants to reiterate the support for the EDAM balancing area participation rules that were reflected by Cal CCA as well as SCE, and is supportive of moving forward with the CAISO's proposal. This will not be the last of items, so you will be hearing about these activities again. And not to belabor the SPTO conversation, but the complexities of the market, as many of us know, are going to continue this intermingling and discussion of overlap and how separate initiatives in the CAISO, as well as the rest of the West, come together. And I think as long as we are continuing the discussion and moving forward with the intent to produce the best benefit for our customer in a reliable system, we can achieve all of that. No easy task, but certainly a doable one. I will stop there and take any questions you might have.
Any questions from the board or comments from staff? Thank you for that. Go ahead.
20-minute speech.
You are very welcome, Angela.
Sorry. Any other comments? Yes, I thank you, Scott, for the brevity in which you just presented that. Now I believe we can move on. Roger.
Mary?
It looks like Danny has a question.
I'm sorry, who has, oh, Danny has a comment.
Yeah, it wasn't a question so much as a comment. This isn't going to be a 20-minute monologue, but given that we've had a few different commenters, I wanted to provide another quick summary before we get to voting. There was 4 elements that I brought forward today. There's the settlement for transfers and transfer revenue within the EDAM. That was one piece. Then the historic transmission revenue recovery. The third piece was the surcharge for the RSE failures, or surcharge or revenue allocation, with then the fourth being the ISO's proposed use of the EDAM net export constraint. So I thank you for listening, and to the extent I can answer any outstanding questions that may still be out there after hearing commenters, I'd like to do so, but if not, thank you for your time.
Danny, that was very succinct. Thank you for that summary, and nice job with the presentation. Now I believe we are moving to Roger as the corporate secretary to read the motion.
Thank you, Chair Leslie, and I am not paid to be succinct as a lawyer, but I will keep this as brief as possible. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the 4 recommended sets of rules to govern the ISO Balancing Authority area's participation in the extended day-ahead market as described in the memorandum dated September 13, 2023. And move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the changes proposed in this memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy, but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved. I'm assuming that the motion includes the 4 areas that Danny just outlined for us.
It does, because that's what's described in the memorandum.
Okay, gotcha. I'll move it.
Second.
Thank you. Governor Bornstein, second. Governor Shorey moves. And your vote, Governor Bornstein.
Aye.
Governor Eto?
Aye.
Governor Golitseva,
Aye.
Chair Leslie,
Aye.
Vice Chair Shori.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, governors. The motion passes.
Thank you. Now we are moving on to item number 6, the decision on capacity procurement mechanism track 2. Roger, can you please state for the record if we have any public letters?
Yes. Thank you. We do not have any public comment letters on agenda item number 6, so we can move to the management discussion.
Terrific.
Anna?
Are you introducing management?
Yes, Anna McKenna, Vice President, Market Design and Analysis.
Thank you, Roger. Chair Leslie. I'm happy to introduce this topic. Partha Malhodkar, our Principal Resource Adequacy, will be presenting the proposal on Capacity Procurement Mechanism Enhancements Track 2. It is a discrete change we're seeking, and Partha will walk us through the presentation. Partha, please begin. Partha, we can't hear you in case you're trying to speak.
Oh, great. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Chair Leslie and Council Governors, for the opportunity to present on the second track of our Capacity Procurement Mechanism initiative. You wanted to move to slide 2. So the purpose of this initiative is to meet the FERC requirement, including our tariff, to re-examine whether our CPM soft offer cap adequately reflects the going forward costs of the reference resource. As I'll discuss later, we're in the process of scheduling working group meetings around resource adequacy that will holistically look at reforms to RA, including larger changes needed to our backstop processes, including CPM, and our availability incentive mechanism rules. But as a bridge to that eventual initiative, we are meeting the tariff requirements here by looking at the narrow issue around the soft offer cap. I'm going to go to slide 3. So for background on our CPM processes, the CPM is foundational to the CAISO's backstop process to address resource adequacy deficiencies and other defined reliability concerns. The ISO can use the CPM authority to address 6 specific needs as it's defined in our tariff. First, insufficient local capacity area resources. Second, the collective deficiency in local capacity. Third, insufficient RA at the system level. 4, CPMs associated with significant events. And 5, a reliability or operational need for exceptional dispatch leading to a CPM offer. And 6, a cumulative deficiency in the total flex capacity. Our CPM designations largely rely on capacity willingly offered through annual, monthly, and intermonthly solicitation processes. And the CPM soft offer cap limits the price sellers may sell into the auction up to the soft offer cap limit without having to cost justify at FERC. I'm willing to go to slide 4. So the soft offer cap was really designed with multiple competing objectives to be high enough to cover the going forward costs from the marginal resources on the system, and simultaneously acting to mitigate market power for resources needed for reliability. As discussed previously, the cap is not a hard cap, but a soft cap, as offers above the soft offer cap can be cost justified at FERC to recover resource-specific costs as filed. We're willing to flip to slide number 4. Slide number 5. Thank you. So at our May CPM Enhancements Track 2 workshop, the CEC presented to stakeholders their updated combined cycle going forward fixed cost analyses. As instructed by the ISO tariff, the CEC provided updates to 3 specific going forward cost components that are needed to derive the ISO's CPM soft offer cap, namely 1, insurance, 2, ad valorem and taxes, and 3, fixed operations and maintenance costs. In order to update these components, the CEC incorporated a 2023 start year into its cost of generation model and accounted for updates, particularly in labor rates and inflation figures. The CEC found that the levelized going forward cost for a 550 megawatt combined cycle resource increased to $73.41 a kilowatt year. Under the ISO tariff, the derivation of the soft hopper cap requires this figure to be multiplied by 120%, with the result in $88.09 a kilowatt year, or $7.34 a kilowatt month. We'll just flip to slide 6. We also reviewed whether it's reasonable to continue to use a gas unit as a proxy unit, and determined that based on the data on actual CPMs, it was reasonable, particularly until we have a more complete broad look at RA reforms. As shown in the figure below, the ISO has made a total of 2,803 megawatts of CPM designations over the last 4 years. 66% have been for gas-fired resources, and of those gas-fired resources, roughly 2/3 were specifically for combined cycle resources, with the remaining 1/3 being for frame combustion turbines. We're going to move to slide 7. So as such, management recommends the board approve for the CAISO to file it for a change to our soft hopper cap values from $6.31 a kilowatt month to $7.34 a kilowatt month. I'd note that stakeholders are generally supportive of this change as being directionally important, but many emphasize that and advocate for a strong relook at our CPM and backstop design processes within that wider RA reform effort. So with that, I'm here to answer any questions, and yeah, thank you again. Really appreciate it. And I also want to thank stakeholders as well as the ISO team for a successful stakeholder process. So yeah, thank you again, Chair Leslie, and with that, I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? If there's no questions at this time, then we're going to DMM would like to comment, and I believe Eric Hildebrand will be commenting on this particular issue. Eric?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to comment on this. In this stakeholder process and prior processes, I think we have continued to raise concerns that the annual cost estimate from the 2018 CEC survey is kind of an outlier, and it significantly overestimates the going forward fixed costs of gas resources. We have compared that to prior CEC numbers, other studies, and RMR units and filings, cost filings from the CAISO area as well. As an annual fixed cost number to be used, in some other context, I think we want to be on record saying, that it should be reviewed further. Nevertheless, we support how it's being used in this case and the 16% increase that is being proposed at this point, and I'll explain why. So first of all, probably the biggest aspect of this is that the methodology takes an annual going forward fixed cost number, and then it divides it by 12 to get 12 equal monthly payments. So this kind of reflects the expectation that a unit would be getting a CPM, 12 months out of the year. But in practice, almost all units receive CPM designations for only 1 or maybe 2 summer months of the year. And these are the months when there's, clearly capacity has its highest value. Peaking unit might actually look, to the few summer months to recover most or all of its fixed costs. So we think, that aspect of it goes, largely offsets the issues we have with the annual fixed cost number being plugged in to the current methodology. Second, when CPM was originally developed, I think especially in DMM, we expected it to play a more important role mitigating local market power in areas where capacity might be needed, throughout the year. But fortunately, the amount of capacity over the last 10 years that has been procured has been actually quite low. And almost all of this capacity has been at a system level rather than for local requirements where there would be more of a local market power concern. Third, the soft offer cap, the current cap plus the 16% increase, we think it really now represents a reasonable short-term monthly capacity payment, which is essentially how it's being used. And I think it's supported by a broad consensus of stakeholders, including suppliers and load-serving entities. So I think DMM, as well as most stakeholders, appear to generally agree that it's a reasonable cap for the way it's being used as a capacity payment during the peak summer months. And so from this perspective, we point out, it's not so much looking at a local market power, but really it is a payment. And in some cases, it's been used to procure imports from the rest of the West. So from that perspective, one benchmark for the value is kind of a regional price for capacity in these months. And then finally, clearly stakeholders have requested that the ISO explore a lot of other changes related to the CPM process in the context of the broader RA program and RMR. So, and the ISO is committed to working with stakeholders next year on this, on broader reforms. So I think this will give a chance to kind of re-examine the basic formula or theory underlying the current approach. So in summary, we support the current the proposal to go forward with a fairly modest 16% increase in the CPM payment. And I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions from the board? Seeing no questions from the board, Michelle, can we please see if there are questions from our virtual attendees?
Absolutely. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to make a comment, please click on the raise hand icon on your screen. This will enter you into the comment queue. Please remember to indicate your affiliation as well as your name. If you are dialed in via our phone line, pressing #2 will enter you into the comment queue. All right. I do not see any raised hands in queue at this time.
All right, seeing no raised hands, then Roger, you're going to read the motion.
Yes. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approve the revision to the capacity procurement mechanism soft offer cap as described in this memorandum dated September 13, 2023, and move that the ISO Board of Governors authorize management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the change proposed in the memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy, but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Governor Glitzman.
Second.
Thank you, Governor Eto. Governor Bornstein, your vote.
Aye.
Governor Eto.
Aye.
Governor Glitzman.
Aye.
Chair Leslie.
Aye.
And Vice Chair Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion passes.
All right, seeing I will introduce the next item, item 7, decision on conditional approval to approve reliability must run contracts. Roger, you'll be introducing.
Yes, there are no public comment letters, and we do have Neil Millar, Vice President, Infrastructure and Operations Planning, to introduce this item. Neil?
Thank you, and good morning, Chair Leslie, Board of Governors. Today I'll be introducing Jeff Billington, our Director of Transmission Infrastructure Planning, to walk through the presentation itself. We believe this year is a relatively straightforward and a bit of an annual event at this time each year, where we seek conditional approval of the reliability must-run requirements for next year. With that, I will turn it over to Jeff to walk through the details of the RMR requirements for next year and the situation in RMR overall. Thank you. Jeff?
Thanks, thanks, Neil. And good morning, Chair Leslie and members of the board. I'll go through the decision item as Neil indicated for the conditional approval to extend the RMR contracts for 2024. And so as we look at this, this is thought and with this, reliability needs in local areas determined through the ISO studies has determined and identified for specific resources under current reliability must-run contracts that they are continue to be required for 2024. And for these units, the resource adequacy capacity has not otherwise been contracted for at this time. If you go to the next slide, please. Based on the scheduled events in August and in September, conditional approvals are sought at this time of the year, and with the letters for the reliability must-run extensions or terminations to be sent to the resource owners on October 1st. This process will take into account the preliminary resource adequacy showings made by local service serving entities by September 15th related to current reliability must-run resources. Next slide, please. So with this, the extension of the reliability must-run designation contracts for local needs for 2024 are recommended for the Oakland Units 1 and Units 3. The results of the must-run contract extensions will be reported back to you at the November board meeting. And the ISO, in addition to the extensions, the ISO will not be seeking an extension of reliability must-run contracts for the Greenleaf 2 cogen as it is now under a resource adequacy contract. So we only had these units for system or for local needs. There are no system need RMR requirements for 2024. If you go to the next slide, please. So subject to the conditional approval of the identified reliability must-run contracts, the ISO will take the following steps. Like I indicated, we'll continue to track through the end of September the status of all resources and contracts, and we'll report back the results of the RMR contract extensions at the November board meeting. That concludes the presentation on the RMR needs for 2024.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any comments from the board or questions?
Yeah, one quick comment. Thank you, Jeff. Just very quickly, do you expect the RMR designations to change in the interim from the conditional approval? I'm glad you don't need them for system reliability and a very limited local reliability requirement, but are we expecting things to shift and change, or we expect this to be it and nothing else changing?
This is basically the extent that we see right now based on our studies for 2024. And like I said, we'll report back if the Oakland units are to get a contract between now and the end of September. We'll inform you of that in the November board meeting.
But the others being picked up for RA, then there's no danger of someone coming back and saying, oops, I need an RMR, I got dropped or something.
I guess if somebody was to seek retirement that doesn't have an existing, that may be a case, but we haven't received anything from any parties that we would need RMR for the needs based upon a retirement request.
Okay, so anything coming up would be a surprise.
Correct.
Thank you.
And Jeff, can you remind us how long that extension is for?
They're on an annual basis. So we'll be basically on an annual basis. We come at this time to look for or seek the extension for the next year. So in this same time next year, depending upon what the status of resources are, like and the contracts. We'd be looking for an extension potentially next year, depending upon what our studies show for 2025. So it's an annual review and then extension for the RMR contracts.
And this is in PG&E territory?
Yes, this is basically in the Oakland area, in the PG&E area.
Right. So contingencies for new sources of power, they're also in partnership with the city of Oakland and the utilities on that? Meaning they will figure out a way other than using RMRs to find local sources of power.
Yeah, we have
several years. What?
We had approved a project in the area. It's currently for transmission, as well as there was for procurement of storage in the area. The transmission upgrade is scheduled to be in service based upon the last transmission development forum in April of 2025. That eliminates part of the need. Plus, there is the procurement for a local battery within the area, which is being currently under process. And in our transmission planning process, we continue to monitor the needs in the area as well, beyond if there's additional load growth or those requirements.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? If there are none, then Michelle, I'm going to ask you whether or not we have anybody in the queue.
There are currently no questions in the queue.
Okay, seeing no questions in the queue, Roger, would you like to read the motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair Leslie. Move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to extend reliability must-run contracts for the Dynegy Oakland LLC generating units listed on attachment 1 of the memorandum dated September 13th, 2023, and consistent with the criteria described therein. Have a motion, please?
So moved, Jan.
Second, Severin.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Severin. Severin, your vote.
Aye.
Governor Edo?
Aye.
Governor Glitova?
Aye.
Chair Leslie?
Aye.
And Vice Chair Shorey?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, Board of Governors. The motion passes. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you. We're on our last item, item number 8, informational reports. Are there any questions regarding any of the following reports? The business practice manual change management report, the regulatory report, the state, regional, and federal affairs report, the transmission development forum update, or the WEIM benefits and market update Q 2023. If there are no questions or inquiries regarding that, I believe that we have come to the end of our meeting and that we may adjourn.
You are correct.
Yes, thank you.
And Mary,
you all.
what time would you like to convene the executive session?
Is it the wish of the board to have 15 minutes to a half hour? Perfect. Okay, so should we convene at 12:15? Reconvene at 12:15?
Perfect.
Or 12.
Lunch? Okay. Perfect. 12:15.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Aye.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using event services. You may now disconnect.